The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today for Thursday, October 31st, 2019. It's probably Halloween where you are. I guess where I am, they postponed it until tomorrow. I guess Halloween can be postponed. One thing that wasn't postponed was Toronto's win last night versus Atlanta. Toronto going back to the MLS Cup once again versus Seattle. How are you today, Duane?
I'm doing well, Kevin. Part 3, as you said. You know what's scary to the rest of MLS? Toronto and Seattle. Sorry, I was trying to go with something there. It didn't quite work. But no.
A little Halloween reference, but... Third time's a charm. Well, I guess not. It's the rubber match between Seattle and Toronto, both having won once. 2016, Seattle beat Toronto in Toronto. 2017, Toronto beat Seattle in Toronto. This time, it will happen in Seattle. We're going to have plenty of time to break down and to preview MLS Cup. Let's talk about last night. How I would say this match was a match of two different match in a same match. There was the first 9 minutes, and then there was the 81 minute following.
Well, no, for sure. I mean, you could go first and second half as well, but absolutely, Toronto's 9 minutes of madness, which ends with Westberg with that save, which was a hell of a penalty save on what I think we both agree was not actually a penalty. Although I can understand why the referee made the call. I'm just curious on whether VAR still exists or not.
VAR, I guess, is not available in the playoffs. So that's what we're seeing, because that was definitely not a contact in the box, and Pity Martinez did fall pretty easily for that penalty.
Yeah, well, thankfully we're not talking about it beyond sort of joking right now, because it would have absolutely, been a turning point there. 9 minutes in, as you say, if Atlanta scores that goal, there's no way back. It's hold on and hope it's not embarrassing time for Toronto. And look, they made some adjustments after that. For whatever reason, their line was too high is what was happening. Anyone who's listened to us or has followed TFC knows that their biggest weakness really is their lack of speed, particularly at the back, and they were getting killed. Atlanta was just going straight up the middle, directly targeting Bradley's foot speed, Samoan's foot speed, and was creating havoc in that first 9 minutes. And it was something like that penalty and Westbrook making the save. It was like they calmed down at that point and went, okay, we need to take 2 steps back, and we can't push forward as much as we maybe wanted to in the pregame. And maybe Vanney was thinking the same way I was, that they needed to go out and punch them in the face, so to speak, at the beginning of the game. Well, the opposite was happening, but they adjusted. And after that, although Atlanta had, I haven't seen the stats, it's probably close to 60% of the ball, if not more, but there really weren't a lot of point-blank chances for Atlanta. Maybe, 1 or 2 here or there for sure, but by and large, it wasn't the same as that first 9 minutes, as you said, because that first 9 minutes was ugly.
Well, let's start with the goal, the Gressel goal, 4 minutes in. And I don't know what's happening with me, Duane, but it's been this week, the 2 games. I had feelings, I had predictions, and I'm talking about them, and they're materializing on the field. I was like, Pity Martinez, I think he's going to have a good game, and he could be the key to victory for Atlanta. 4 minutes in, Pity Martinez with Gressel on a 2-on-1 with the keeper. Pity Martinez giving the ball to Gressel on an open net. Nothing Westberg or Bradley tracking back could have done to save it. 1-0 Toronto. And 4 minutes later, at the 8th minute, there's a penalty. Martinez being tripped in the box by Bradley after Laurent Simon tried to clear the ball off of his path, missed it, left Pity Martinez all alone in front of Bradley. The foul, the penalty, the dive, the penalty, and then the save by Westberg. Those 9 minutes versus how Toronto reacted, especially in the second half, but the rest of the game was a little bit more lackluster, and I say it was a bit more testy, because both teams were like, okay, we're already a goal in. It's been 8 minutes. Let's calm this down a little bit. Let's not turn this into LAFC versus the LA Galaxy, and let's calm down. And we did see Toronto slowly work and build confidence back up in this game, all the way to that great goal later on by Nick De Leon. But the goal of Benezet, how important was it? And Was I right by saying Guzan would make a mistake? And is that a mistake by Guzan not stopping that shot?
It's a nice curling shot. I mean, you know, I think anytime you get scored on from outside the box as a keeper, you want to have another chance at that, and you'd rather stop that. I think maybe he was a little bit slow to react, perhaps because of bodies in front of him. But certainly, you know, he hit the corner, so we'll give him credit for the shot. No, for how important. Well, I mean, it was very important. I don't know. There's no other way to put it. It was incredibly important because all what it did is it ended the 9 minutes of madness. It went, okay, game on. And from that point forward, it was a different game. And although Atlanta had most of the ball, Toronto was not giving up a lot of chances. They adjusted. They just said, okay, well, this is how this game's going to have to go. We're going to have to be tight. We're going to have to, you know, sit back, defend, and hope we get a chance because Atlanta's rolling tonight. And they were. Atlanta played very well, I think. I don't think they lost that game. I think Toronto just stole it, and with a couple of moments of excellence from players, both goals outside the box, right?
That's the playoff format in a nutshell as well. You only need one moment of brilliance in a very close game to be enough to influence the result of this game. The Nick DeLeon golazo, the cracker of a shot in the second half, was enough to propel Toronto to the final. That's the beauty, and I guess the very small margins of the one-game playoff format is if you have one moment of brilliant, you might win. One collapse of defensive mentality, you might lose.
No, precisely. It's a very fine line for sure to steal a line from Carl Robinson. You know, as I said, Atlanta was unlucky to not get something from that, particularly the way they played off the top. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that this is some kind of travesty either. You know, defense is part of the game too. And as I've said 3 times now, Toronto didn't give up a lot of clear-cut chances after the first 9 minutes. They certainly adjusted, didn't allow them to get in behind anymore, and they got the job done against a team that is, you know, very, very good and very, very talented, the defending champions. Look, I think that this was a moment where if you look at TFC's experience over the past 3 years, 4 years, particularly their experience playing in the CCL in 2018, where they were able to take on more talented teams than Atlanta and stay in games and give them a chance to get opportunities to take it, you know, to grab a hold of the game, as they did against Tigres, as they did against Club America, as they did in the second leg against Chivas, not so much the first leg, but in the second leg for sure. That's invaluable experience that no other team in this league that's currently playing right now has. They did stuff in that CCL run, which made them a very mentally tough team. And I think even the adversity that they've had earlier in this year, you know, you go back to July. I was looking at some of my tweets in July and remembering what it was like back then. Their ability to, like, say, you know, on August 2nd or whatever it was, August 3rd, I believe, was when they won their first game of the now 13-game streak, 13-game unbeaten streak. Their mentality since then was like, we can't afford to slip up anymore. We can't lose again. And they've just consistently ground out results since then. And a lot of people looked at their form heading into the playoffs. We were talking about this in the lead up to decision day when they had, you know, were undefeated in 9, but only 3 wins. At the time, we were presenting that as a negative. I now think of it as a positive because that showed me that they were able to stay in games even when they maybe weren't at their best. They got points when they might have lost all 3 before, right? And that in a playoff situation where all you have to do is stay in those games to give yourself a chance is vital. And 9 minutes into that game, they took a step back and went, okay, we need to settle this. This is not over. We have 80 minutes to deal with this, and they did. And that's a testament to a mentally tough team. And I don't think anyone can argue that TFC has not proven to be a very mentally tough team over the last 3 months now.
Yeah, and to add to your point, I'll also use a couple of other examples. So far in these playoffs, I think experience of teams, not just players in the team, but the team itself, experience together, having overcome adversity before together, really helped teams here. Look at the brackets of the playoff. I'm going to put it on people's screen for a second so you can see what I'm talking about. Look, Minnesota, not a lot of playoff experience. Of course, the LA Galaxy, great, but not a lot of playoff experience too. Seattle won a close game versus the LAFC. Seattle dominated their opponents or found ways to get the job done. Just the one goal more. Found a way to get things done. And were able to win 3 in a row to be in MLS Cup. Same for Toronto. And those two teams have been 3 times over the last 4 years now in MLS Cup, but also playoffs. When is the last time Seattle missed the playoffs? Exactly. And Toronto, they did have that one blip in 2018 for sure. That was maybe the consequences of the CONCACAF Champions League, the accumulation of a lot of soccer being played for a lot of players. But I do feel that experience of the teams, their core of players together, and with their coaches together, being together in adversity in playoff time, and knowing that we won those games and we came back from behind, that not straight to panic type of reaction that we saw from Vanney after a goal being scored, or we saw from Seattle or Toronto throughout the playoffs, really shows that experience in a one game. Yeah, I guess it becomes more important than a home and away series. Game management, experience of the team together, and experience of the manager managing its team, knowing what it needs, knowing what button to push to get them going. We saw that with Seattle and Toronto.
Absolutely. I mean, the two teams are in the final. I made a tweet this morning that said, if you're going to talk about the best teams of all time, which we've been talking about a lot in a lot of circles within Major League Soccer, sort of, opinion makers out there. And they're talking about LAFC this year. They're talking about Atlanta last year. I mean, how can you ignore the two teams? And I say two purposely. I'm not just talking about Toronto here, that have made 3 of 4 finals, because this is a league that is set up in such a way that the ultimate test is to win MLS Cup, and these two teams have gotten to the very end 3 out of 4 years. That is an incredible accomplishment, and I know it's probably boring a few people outside of the two markets, but
yes, because I'm outside of the two markets, and I can agree. But here's my thing as well. We talked yesterday about Brian Schmetzer and how Brian Schmetzer, I felt, was a bit underrated, not appreciated enough, underappreciated in Major League Soccer for the success Seattle has had over the last 4 years. Greg Vanney, is he underrated as well?
Yeah, I underrated is an understatement, I think, because he's not a guy that gets talked about amongst the best managers. Neither Spencer, as you say, that gets talked about amongst the best managers in Major League Soccer. And part of that, I think, with Vanney is that he inherited a team that had a lot of top-end talent and got them over the hump. But he inherited a team that had a lot of top-end talent and was spinning its wheels, right? Like he came in 2014. They didn't make the playoffs after he came in, but what was he going to do with them at that point? Defoe was pouting and not really, a contributor, and it has done nothing but win since there, with the exception of the 2018 season. He has done, last night he didn't really make it. Well, that's a lie. He didn't really make a lot of adjustments heading into the game. He managed to solidify and change the approach after the penalty stop. And you can argue that maybe he should have came into the game with that, and that's fair enough. But I just think Atlanta was on last night and were really they had an idea, and they were really taking advantage of that. And that is going straight up the middle, going straight at players, trying to beat them in speed, beat them on the transition, and they were doing it successfully. But like as I said, he made the adjustment. They sat back, took 2 steps back basically, and defended well the rest of the game. Is that all in the manager? No. I mean, if you even talk to him in the post-game interview with TSN, he said this was one that wasn't about this is not a game about X's and O's. This was about desire. Probably a lot of it, but he's also given himself a little bit of discredit because his ability to find a way to produce a system that is working for the collection of guys that he have, which are talented, but not as talented as they could be or should be based on their roster because they have 2 massive injuries, is absolutely worth praising. Vanney out? No.
Speaking of injuries, Omar Gonzalez was on the 18, but did not start, and I think he did not play, if I'm not mistaken. And also, Josie Altidore was in Atlanta, but not on the 18. So a little bit of gamesmanship, but now about less than 10 days before Major League Soccer's most important game of the season MLS Cup Sunday, December 10th at 4 p.m. Eastern. I mentioned that I may be going to MLS Cup. Well, that was before Seattle was an option. It ain't an option for me this year, but you know what? That means I'll be in studio all the time producing a lot more content around November 10th.
TBD for me. I'm trying to figure out whether I can. It's very expensive.
It's very expensive, and we have to leave tomorrow if we want to drive there. So there you go.
Well, maybe next weekend. But yeah, no. If you don't know, it's about $1,000 return trip from Toronto if you're looking. But maybe TFC might be able to work something out in the days ahead. We haven't had any information in this market about how that's going to work because it is a ways off. It's strange though. I get that there's a break, but it's a bit weird to me that they have this long of a break for MLS Cup. The way that this playoffs is set up, I'd almost rather they just play next Sunday. But
give them a little. I guess they want to make sure that the knocks and the little injuries have time to heal for next Sunday, because it came at us fast. Like, the playoffs are almost over. There's only one game left. That was a quick week and a half.
I suspect that the real reason why there's a delay is because they want to allow media and corporate sponsors the opportunity to book travel more than it is
and
to do with anything to do with the players. But
they have to plan the damn thing too. It's for them that they learned last night that it was Seattle, Toronto as well. So this morning, a lot of people in the MLS headquarters on the phone in the Pacific Northwest saying, okay, book hotels, okay, where are we doing the media party? Where's this event? Where's this event? Yeah, today's a hectic day on MLS headquarters phone lines for sure, calling the Pacific Northwest like crazy.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Look, MLS Cup is we've been to a few ourselves, so we've seen it firsthand. It is a big thing. There's a lot going on beyond the game. I mean, they book parties, they have opportunities to get the crowd involved with things. There's supporter stuff going on. Like, a lot happens during MLS Cup, even now that it's not in a neutral venue. And it was a neutral venue, it was even bigger. In 2020, the MLS Cup I was at was like a Super Bowl, except no one was paying attention, which is why they put it to the home hosting thing, which is for the best. I prefer it much more.
It would be easy if we could guarantee, Duane, that the stadium would be filled, a neutral site, and have the fan base of those teams to travel to the neutral site. Having this league in this fashion, it'll be difficult to pull off what the NFL does, and there's barely any leagues in the world that could pull off having their championship game in a neutral site and having it sold out like this every single year. You put NHL Stanley Cup Final, the 7th game on a neutral site, guess what? Half of those games are not sold out. So, yeah, there's that aspect. And the biggest show in North America is NFL. So it's hard to compete with an organization that can just plan a party 2 years in advance in a city and everything's crazy. For MLS Cup, they have 12 days now to get ready.
Well, it's in the culture, as you say. I mean, even the Grey Cup, which is not nearly on a day-to-day basis in Canada, the CFL, at least in the major cities, is not something that we talk about. But Grey Cup still is something that we all go to because it's just got a history behind it. MLS Cup simply does not at this point. It's about the home markets. It's about the fans that support and love and get out there every week to support those teams. That's what the game's about. So it should be played at the venue of one of the hosting teams. And I have zero problem with that. And even, I was talking to a lot of people last night, obviously, after the game ended, and I was sitting there watching people booking flights. So it's something that's kind of, it's a little more exciting almost from a TFC perspective after hosting it 2 years in a row to have the opportunity, and I use that word purposely, to go on the road to see the team. But it is pretty pricey. But nonetheless, it should be. I
would have taken somewhere closer. I would have not been mad at all if a team, I don't know, then I'm trying to think of a close Western Conference team. It's like, yeah, they're not really close. It's too bad TFC couldn't get a better season to host it once again. No, I'm just talking crap here because, yeah, Seattle's far, and I was looking forward to MLS Cup. Maybe next year I can make my return to MLS Cup.
Yeah, no, it's tough for those of us that don't have, massive corporate backings to make last minute plans to go somewhere. But I mean, if you are a supporter of the team, that they're going to find a way. And as I said, I know a few people that have already, and pulled out the credit card literally at final whistle last night, which,
Exactly.
you know,
That doesn't matter. The future, who needs a house? Who needs next month's rent? Experiences, that's where it's at. Go to the game.
Indeed. And if those that don't go to the game, I'm sure that this city will have several spots that will be absolutely packed, that will give you an experience that is similar with people that care as much as you do. It's a funny thing, MLS Cup, in a city like this, the city I'm in. There are lots of people that care, for sure. TFC is lucky in the sense that it is mainstream in this city, but at the same time, it is clearly the fourth team in the city, so it won't be the Raptors. Nothing really could be, but it'll be interesting. It'll be very interesting for me to see. If I can't find my way to Seattle, I will be very intrigued to see what the reaction of the city will be to a third MLS Cup in 3 years, whether they get the same excitement as they did in the past. Certainly with the hardcore supporters that I was with last night, it almost felt better than the other two because it was less expected.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether that's reached the general population yet.
Well, that's for sure. But you mentioned less expected, and I think that's the surprising here. Toronto had a difficult beginning of the season, and they had to work hard. Seattle and Toronto are very similar to their story this year. Of course, both with a great core of players, injuries, a few key components over the last few years leaving the team, and you find yourself with a different core of players, a few of them the same, a few of them different, managers the same. The season doesn't go according to plans. Both teams have to adjust mid-season, and both teams are able to put on runs when it matters, coming into the playoff hot. And we're seeing both teams, again, each other in the final. Very similar, I would say, blueprint for the playoff. It's, once again, it's how you finish. It's not how you start in Major League Soccer. But also, the panic button, we press it really hard. And if you go back to Montreal this year, there was a lot of moment where Montreal panicked a lot, fired the coach and everything. I think there's something to be said about just hold on, wait it out, give yourself a chance. We've seen it in Seattle. We've seen it in Toronto. We've seen it in Seattle in 2016. And we're seeing it once again this year with the two finalists. I do believe there's something about not giving up and just making sure you par for the course. Par for the course.
No, you mentioned Montreal, and I don't mean this is a diss or an insult to Impact fans that are listening, but if this was reversed, if TFC were the Impact and we're back in July, after I don't know if you remember in detail, but Greg Vanney made this huge squad rotation against Houston at the end of July, and Houston was not a very good team. They were playing their second game in a row at home. They needed the 3 points because they were below the red line at that point. Vanney made this massive rotation. They didn't get the points. They lost the game. Everyone was calling for Vanney's head, and not everyone. Some people on Twitter were calling for his head. I can't help but thinking, having observed the Impact for years, that if the roles were reversed, he might have been fired then. But as you say, patience and just allowing things to play out and not listening to the mob is sometimes the way to go. And I'm not sure, and again, not a knock on Montreal, but an observation about how they've operated over the years. Maybe they should learn from their rivals a little bit when it comes to stuff like that. And to be fair, their rivals were awful in years before the last few, but right now.
And it's not just Montreal, Duane. Also, there's a bunch of examples you can use in MLS this year. Coaches are losing their job. It worked in New England, so maybe that explained the thinking behind. But I think it's important to remember next time we see a coach struggling in Major League Soccer, a team struggling, a team that has maybe more ambition than the record would show next season in MLS, let's come back to this moment where Toronto and Seattle waited out, fixed the situation, and went on a run to both make it all the way to MLS Cup. I think it's an important lesson that we need to remember our listeners and ourselves next year when one of our teams is struggling.
There are very, very, very few occasions where I will abdicate for a coach to be fired. Pat Key, maybe this year, would be an example of one of them that I would agree with the decision, but that's not an on-field issue, right? I think that when you should evaluate coaches is the same way you evaluate players at the end of the season when you've looked at their entire play. My biggest issue, I used to write, back when I first started doing all this stuff, I used to write a column, Sober Second Thoughts. Its origin was a post-game column. The reason I stopped doing it as a post-game column is because I felt that we get too caught up in the day-to-day in this current culture, and that's beyond just soccer, but we get too caught up in the moment and don't look at the big picture enough. And I think that when you're evaluating Major League Soccer, you need to look at 10-game chunks and at trends and to be patient, because this is not a league where you're ever really out of it unless you're like Cincinnati this year or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
There's always a chance, and if you see positives beyond the results, we get too caught up in and then fans. And I'm not trying to blame fans for this. Fans are going to fan. That's fine. God loves them, they've got to fan. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. But you've just got to take a longer view if you want to be successful. And there's not, as you say, it's not just the impact that don't do this. There's across sports. There's multiple examples of teams that just don't take that because it's emotional. When you own a soccer team, own a professional sports team, you're an emotional investment. It makes sense that it's hard for you to not react to the insanity of the moment and take the long view. But I think teams that do take the long view are rewarded. Doesn't mean that you should never change or pivot. Of course you should, but you should only do so after there's been a lot of evaluation and at the proper time. It is rare. The infamous, notorious, cliched coach bump.
Yeah, the coach bump doesn't exist.
It sometimes exists, but those outliers are played up as if they're the norm. It's not.
It's not. And TFC did remain patient and remain calm. They carried on and they went all the way to MLS Cup. So did Seattle. And next Sunday, MLS Cup Final. Seattle Sounders, Toronto FC, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific, live from CenturyLink Stadium in Seattle. Now, Duane, when we look at the season itself and the playoff, we only have one game left in MLS in 2019. Can I get your short answer what do you think about the playoff format with 95% of the playoff being played already?
It's fine. It's fine. It's been fun for sure. I'll say that. Is it the best way to determine a fair and equitable champion? What does that even mean to ask that question? Really, any formats. I'm famous for saying this. There's no bad formats. It's just as long as everyone's on the same page, it's equal. I still prefer 2-game legs. With a single game final. I liked the way that they held it before. I understand why they needed to change because of the international break in the middle of the playoffs. I get it. Also, weather in December in the Northeast is worse than weather in March in the Northeast, so it makes sense that they tried to get away from that. But yeah, it's fine. Is my short answer. I'm not passionate about either format, to be honest with you. But obviously, this has worked out in the way that you've had. It's almost the perfect situation. You've had enough upsets, but not too many. You have two teams in the final that both have compelling stories. You have Seattle, which, although not the best team LAFC was, but certainly right there, and the most consistent team of the last 10 years, just restricting this to this year. And you have TFC, which is the hot team, right? So you've got the consistent team and the hot team, so it kind of makes sense that that's the final. And from if you're going to spell this out, that's kind of what you'd want any final to be, to have a consistent favorite and a hot underdog. That's kind of a good situation. So it's worked. And, for LAFC fans or Atlanta fans I don't think Atlanta fans have much to complain about. They weren't that consistent throughout the year, but LAFC fans might have a bit of an issue with this format. But what I'd say to that is that, from about mid-August on, the team has not been, they've been good, but they haven't been at the same level of excellence as they were before. And the reality is, as I said a moment ago, the format is the same for every team. Every team designs their team, plans their season around the fact that they have to peak at the end. And if they didn't do that, the onus is on them, not the format, not the system.
That's very true. I think we did see interesting game, fascinating game that didn't wait too long to get started, if you know what I mean. Teams going after the first goal, going after opportunities. Because it's a one game, you have the mentality of maybe I won't get another chance. So the importance of every moment in a game has been really it comes off the screen for me. I can see the importance of the moment for the players when they score, when they concede. You see that little note of, I would say, emergency when you concede a goal, and that little note of the great pleasure of scoring. It's like intensified. I think that's what it did for me. The one game instead of two, it's like all the events that usually happens in a home and away series, you just cram it all into one game, and I felt like I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the no tomorrow soccer, and I enjoyed teams going after it without having to think about, well, we need to keep some energy for the second leg. No, there's no tomorrow. You have to go all out, and I guess I like that.
Oh, no, it's absolutely been a victory on the entertainment scale for sure. And the only thing I'd say to that is that if you want to eliminate the caginess of the first leg in home and homes, the way to do that is to simply eliminate the away goal. Away teams in the modern era are not going to sit back unless there's reason to. And if you eliminated that, I think you'd see two games like this in a playoff situation where both teams are going for it rather than one. But at the same time, I can't argue with the idea that the win and go home format is highly entertaining. There's a reason that, we all become college basketball fans every March, right? It works.
Yeah. It's not because I really care about Davidson. It's because it works. You're right. On that note, Duane and I will go have a nap. It's been a busy week in the world of sports and busy evenings. Yeah, I need some to catch up on some Z's, like I would text Duane. On that note, you can follow Duane on social media at 24th Minute, myself at Kev Laramee, and this show at Soccer Today SPN. You're watching us on YouTube. Click the subscribe button right now, please. You're watching us on Twitter. Follow us at Soccer Today SPN, and make sure you subscribe to our podcast versions everywhere you get your podcasts. We are available. And as always, tomorrow we'll be back to continue to talk about MLS Cup next week, to talk about the weekend in the world of football with a soccer perspective. And until tomorrow, as always, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.